A few years ago, during my bachelor's degree, I wrote a research paper on the future of work. At the time, automation felt like a distant worry, something confined to assembly lines or speculative tech blogs. But I remember making a prediction in that paper that while machines might someday write reports or analyze data, true human traits like common sense, creativity, and imagination couldn't be coded, at least not anytime soon. And yet, here we are. Back then, ChatGPT didn't exist. Large language models were experimental tools used by researchers, not by everyday people. Today, they are composing music, drafting business strategies, mimicking empathy, and slowly pushing into tasks we once thought required distinctly human thought. I'm not an expert in AI, but I've always been fascinated by what happens when technology meets inequality, when innovation changes who holds the power, who gets displaced, and who gets ahead. In this episode of Thread by Thread, we look beyond the headlines and hype to ask, what does the rise of AI mean for workers, for wages, and for the global economy? Because when disruption comes this fast, it doesn't just challenge jobs, it challenges what it means to be irreplaceable. Welcome as you're listening to Thread by Thread, a podcast where each episode unravels a new thread, connecting stories of power, people, and the forces shaping our world. I'm Dheeraj Kumar. In this segment, we are diving into the economic side of automation and AI. To understand where we're headed, it helps to look at where we've been. Automation isn't new, it has evolved over centuries in waves. Think of the 19th century Industrial Revolution. Steam engines and mechanical looms began replacing hand labor. In textile mills, machines boosted output dramatically, sparking riots like the Luddite uprisings when English weavers smashed the devices taking their jobs. Even earlier, in 1589, Queen Elizabeth I reportedly denied a patent for a knitting machine, fearing it would put knitters out of work. So, anxiety about machines taking jobs is not just a 21st century thing, it's been around for hundreds of years. Fast forward to the late 20th century, factories started using robots on assembly lines. A classic example is car manufacturing. By the 1970s and 80s, automotive plants had robot arms welding and painting cars. Robots handled the dirty, repetitive tasks, which did raise productivity and consistency. But it also meant fewer assembly line jobs for humans. As one report notes, tasks like welding and spray painting were among the first to be handed off from people to robots in car factories. Workers often stayed on to supervise the machines, but the nature of their jobs changed significantly. From the 1980s onward, computers and software automated clerical work and routine tasks. Offices saw typewriters give way to word processors and filing cabinets to databases. This increased efficiency, yet also meant roles like typists or file clerks largely vanished. Many middle skill jobs that involved routine data work were hollowed out. Economists later observed a polarization effect. Demand rose for high skill professionals and also for lower skill service workers, but mid level jobs shrank. In other words, the digital automation wave helped widen wage gaps by boosting high end and low end jobs while squeezing the middle. Which brings us to today. Now, machines aren't just stronger or faster, they're getting smarter. Artificial intelligence can analyze data, recognize speech, even generate writing and images. This fourth industrial revolution blurs the line between physical and cognitive labor. AI systems can drive vehicles, draft emails, answer customer service calls, you name it. We are essentially teaching machines to mimic human decision making for the first time on a broad scale. This could be as transformational as steam power was, and it's already accelerating. One analysis by PwC famously predicted that by the mid 2030s, up to one third of all jobs could be at risk of automation. Crucially, those most vulnerable will be people in roles requiring less education, often routine service or support jobs. Historically, each tech leap has eventually created new jobs too, often higher skill jobs. But the transition can be very bumpy, and not everyone gets to benefit equally. Now, how has automation impacted income inequality? History gives us mixed examples. Early on, mechanization enriched industrialists, but often kept laborers' wages low until worker movements fought for rights. In recent decades, the pattern has been that technology shifts, tend to reward those with skills or capital and can hurt those without. In fact, new research quantifies this. Over the last 40 years, automation has been a huge driver of wage gaps. A 2022 study by MIT economists found that more than half of the growth in US wage inequality since 1980 can be attributed to automation, essentially machines and software replacing tasks previously done by lower education workers. As routine jobs disappeared, workers without college degrees saw their incomes stagnate or fall, while those with higher education, who are complementary to new tech, pulled ahead. Darren Asimoglu, one of the study's authors, put it bluntly: technologies like self checkout kiosks or automated call systems are labor shifting more than productivity increasing. They don't necessarily make things much more efficient, but they do cut costs for employers by displacing workers, often lower skilled service workers. And that has big distributional effects. In the US, for example, inflation adjusted earnings for men without a high school diploma dropped about 15% since 1980. Even as college educated incomes rose, automation is a key reason. So, what about the current AI boom? How might AI driven automation affect jobs going forward? There's a lot of debate, but many experts warn of significant disruption, especially in white collar and service sectors that were previously considered safe from automation. Unlike factory robots that replaced welders on the assembly line, AI can potentially replace or assist roles that involve sitting at a computer or talking on the phone. We're talking paralegals, customer support reps, translators, office assistants, even parts of doctors and lawyers' work. One striking prediction came recently from Dario Amodei, CEO of the IEI company Anthropic. He warned that advanced AI could eliminate half of all entry-level white-collar jobs in the next 5 years, with unemployment potentially spiking to 10 to 20% as a result. He specifically called out fields like finance, tech, law, and consulting, where a lot of junior tasks, from drafting documents to analyzing data, might be handled by AI assistants. That sounds dramatic, but he and others urge that we take this seriously. Even if that exact number doesn't come to pass, the direction is clear. AI is getting surprisingly good at work that pays middle class salaries. We already see early signs of this shift. For example, big tech companies have scaled back hiring of junior positions. One report noted new graduate hiring in some large firms is down sharply, partly because companies are using AI tools instead. And AI isn't just a Silicon Valley toy, it's showing up in everyday places. In Amazon's massive warehouses, automation is everywhere. The company says 750,000 plus robots are now working collaboratively with their employees, zipping around floors, fetching items, and even sorting packages. Amazon insists the robots assist humans and make jobs safer. But the numbers tell a story. Amazon's order volumes have grown, yet in highly automated facilities, human staffing has actually declined. A recent analysis of Amazon's own data showed that from 2022 to 2024, the most automated fulfillment centers needed about 10% fewer workers on average. In fact, when adjusting for the growth in workload, there was roughly a 25% decrease in warehouse employment levels over just 2 years. In plain English, they're shipping more packages with far fewer people thanks to robots. For a lower income warehouse associate, that trend is alarming. It means fewer such jobs relative to the business volume. Amazon is just one example, but it's illustrative. Warehousing, logistics, manufacturing, these sectors employ many without advanced degrees, and they are ground zero for today's automation. Consider your local grocery store. Have you noticed more self-checkout machines lately? If you scan and bag your own groceries, you have effectively taken over a job a human cashier used to do. The store doesn't have to pay your salary. The customer is doing the work, unpaid. From the business's perspective, that's a win for efficiency or cost cutting. But for workers, it means fewer cashier shifts. And it's happening widely. Retail chains are installing thousands of these kiosks. As one economist quipped, you using a self-checkout isn't about doing a better job than a professional cashier. It's about making the labor cost essentially zero. Multiply that across big retailers, and you see why checkout clerks, who are often low-wage workers, are being displaced. It doesn't dramatically improve productivity for society, but it does cut expenses for companies, and that mainly benefits owners or shareholders, not the hourly employees who see reduced hours or lost jobs. Automation is also creeping into the service jobs that used to require a personal human touch. Customer service is a big one. Many companies now use AI chatbots to handle basic inquiries. If you've called a helpline and got a robot voice, or used an online chat that seemed human but wasn't, that's AI stepping into a service role. This is starting to impact outsourcing industries in developing countries too. We'll talk more about that in the geopolitics segment. In the freelancing world, AI is already causing real shifts. A recent study of a large online freelance platform, think gigs for writing, translation, design, etc., found a 21% drop in new job postings for automation prone work within 8 months of ChatGPT's release. 21% down. That's huge, and it happened practically overnight. Categories like writing and translation were hit hardest. For example, some small businesses that used to hire freelance writers to draft marketing copy can now experiment with letting ChatGPT produce a first draft, with maybe one editor polishing it instead of five writers. Freelance writers, editors, graphic designers are finding some of their usual gigs disappearing. One concrete example: a publisher of travel articles might reduce contracts for writers because an AI can churn out basic location guides that a human just lightly edits. The quantity of work drops, and competition among freelancers increases for the remaining, more complex projects that AI can't handle. So, again, it's the more routine end of those jobs, often done by junior or lower paid freelancers, that evaporate first. Even professionals like coders, journalists, or financial analysts are not immune. AI coders, like GitHub's Copilot or OpenAI's code generation, can automate chunks of programming. AI can draft news summaries or pass financial reports. It doesn't mean these jobs have vanished entirely, but the nature of the work changes. An analyst might spend less time crunching numbers because AI does it faster, and more time on creative interpretation. That can be positive if the person has skills to move up the value chain. But for someone whose job is mainly routine number crunching, they might find their role redundant. In the past, automation mainly threatened blue collar manufacturing jobs. Now, white collar roles are on the line too. The key thread through all these examples is that automation tends to hit the middle and lower income earners disproportionately. Why? Because those jobs, whether it's an Amazon picker, a supermarket cashier, a call center agent, or junior office clerk, involve a lot of repetitive, rule based work. That is exactly what machines excel at. Meanwhile, higher income roles often require managing people, creative thinking, or highly advanced expertise, which for now is harder to automate. Plus, who owns the robots and AI? Capital owners, investors, generally the wealthy, gain when profits increase due to cost cutting. Workers who are displaced often struggle to transition to the new jobs that are created by tech, which usually demand different, often higher skills. The result can be widening inequality. The well educated and the owners of technology reap most of the gains, while many working class employees see their jobs eliminated. We've witnessed this pattern since the 1980s, and as studies show, it's a primary reason the income gap has yawned so wide in countries like the US. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. New jobs do emerge: AI ethicist, robot maintenance technician, etc. And productivity gains from AI could create wealth that society could redistribute. Some optimistic forecasts even say AI and automation will create more jobs than they displace in the long run, but those new jobs might require totally different skills or be located in different places, and there may be a painful period of adjustment. The historical challenge has always been: can workers adapt or be retrained fast enough, and will the gains reach those who are disrupted? So far, the evidence suggests the transition is rough, and without deliberate policies like education, retraining programs, stronger safety nets, the default outcome is greater inequality, exactly what we've seen unfolding. Shifting gears, let's talk about AI on the global stage, geopolitics. This isn't just tech fluff. AI has become a strategic priority for nations. You'll hear phrases like AI arms race because countries view mastery of AI as a key to economic dominance and national security. So, who are the big players and what are they doing? Broadly, the United States and China are the two heavyweight champions in the AI arena, while the European Union is trying to play the role of the referee setting the rules. Their strategies and ethics differ in fascinating ways. The United States has historically taken a market driven, innovation first approach. America's strength in AI comes from its tech giants, companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and OpenAI, and its top universities. The government has been comparatively hands off on regulation, at least until very recently, preferring not to stifle the tech industry. There's a belief that maintaining a lead in AI is critical to both economic and military power. In fact, keeping that edge over China has become an explicit policy goal. The US government is investing in AI, especially for defense. The Pentagon has poured billions into AI R&D for military uses. A famous example is Project Maven, a Department of Defense project that uses AI to analyze drone surveillance footage, basically teaching algorithms to identify targets or threats in the video feeds to assist military analysts. By 2018, Project Maven was already receiving hundreds of millions in funding as part of over $7 billion the DoD earmarked for AI and data processing. This highlights how seriously the US views AI for national security. American officials often talk about AI in almost Sputnik like terms. They don't want to wake up and find they've fallen behind a rival in a critical technology. However, on the ethics front, the US hasn't rushed into broad AI regulations yet. Instead, it issued guidelines. For example, the White House released an AI Bill of Rights blueprint, non binding principles to prevent abusive AI practices. But there isn't a single national AI law in force as of 2025. The approach is more patchwork. Some state laws here, some sector specific rules there, like the FDA regulating AI in medical devices, or the EEOC watching AI in hiring. Why so cautious on regulation? Partly because US policymakers don't want to hamper innovation and lose its competitive edge to China. And politically, it's been tricky to get comprehensive tech legislation through. So the strategy is let the tech flourish, fund research, especially military and advanced research via DARPA, etc., and address issues with existing laws or targeted actions. We're starting to see movement. Congress has held AI hearings, and there's talk of new regulations, but the US is far more laissez faire compared to Europe. Culturally, too, American tech companies tend to adopt an opt out model on ethics. Do it, then react to problems as they arise, rather than an opt in model to prove it's safe first. China, on the other hand, has taken a state driven, all hands on deck approach to AI. The Chinese government views AI as a cornerstone of future national power. They announced a national plan to be the world leader in AI by 2030, and they are serious about it, pouring huge investments into research, sponsoring AI startups, and collecting vast amounts of data, much of it from their enormous domestic market of over a billion people, to train algorithms. In terms of strategy, China's government and companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and newer AI firms work hand in hand more closely than in the West. There's a phrase that data is the new oil, and China has arguably the largest oil field, not just because of population, but also due to relatively fewer privacy restrictions, meaning data from Chinese users can often be mined more freely for AI development. Yet interestingly, China is also moving fast on AI regulations, but with a different purpose than the EU. Rather than primarily protecting individual rights, Chinese AI regulations aim to ensure AI is used in a way that maintains social order and aligns with Communist Party values. For instance, China was one of the first countries to issue rules on recommendation algorithms to curb things like algorithmic discrimination or excessive content promotion, and on deepfakes, requiring watermarks on AI generated media. In 2023, they implemented interim measures on generative AI, basically regulations for ChatGPT like services. These rules demand that generative AI outputs reflect core socialist values and do not threaten national unity. They even require AI training data to be true and accurate, a somewhat odd requirement since AI often learns from imperfect data. But the idea is to prevent the spread of misinformation or content the state disapproves of. In short, China's leadership isn't anti AI. On the contrary, they want more powerful AI, but they absolutely want control over it. So, what about Europe? The European Union has basically said we may not be a leader in AI tech, but we'll be a leader in AI governance. The EU's approach is driven by its values, namely privacy, human rights, and caution about technology's risks. The flagship here is the EU AI Act, passed in 2024, which is the first tiered broad AI law by any major regulator. This law takes a risk based approach. It categorizes AI applications by risk level, unacceptable, high, limited, minimal, and sets rules accordingly. Unacceptable risk AI are outright banned, things the EU believes no democratic society should use. For example, systems for social scoring, than a la Chinese social credit, are banned. AI that does real time remote biometric identification of people in public, basically mass surveillance via facial recognition, is also mostly banned. That's a direct value contrast with China's deployment of those tools. The EU also labels AI that manipulates human behavior, like certain predictive policing or algorithmic manipulation techniques, as unacceptable. Then there are high risk AI systems, like AI used in hiring decisions, credit scoring, medical devices, or law enforcement analysis. These aren't banned, but they face strict requirements: transparency, human oversight, and auditing. For instance, if a European hospital uses an AI to help diagnose patients, that AI will need to meet safety and transparency standards similar to a drug or medical device. Less risky AI, like a spam filter or AI in a video game, has much lighter rules, mainly transparency, e.g., tell users if they're chatting with a bot, not a human. The ethics driving Europe's stance are about safeguarding fundamental rights, preventing AI driven discrimination, preserving privacy, and avoiding Big Brother scenarios. European societies, thanks in part to memories of 20th century authoritarian regimes in some countries, are quite sensitive to surveillance and misuse of data. The EU already has the strict GDPR privacy law, and the AI Act extends that spirit to artificial intelligence. Notably, the EU is even debating bans or limits on police use of facial recognition. While not all European states agree, some want to use it for serious crimes, the general trend is more cautious than in the US or China. One more thing about the EU: they aren't just about restrictions, they also want to stimulate ethical AI innovation under their terms. They fund a lot of academic research and they push for global AI standards. But indeed, critics worry that by regulating early and hard, Europe might scare away AI investment. If it's too difficult or costly to comply in Europe, companies might focus on the US or Asia instead. This has happened somewhat in the past with tech. Europe has great research, but relatively few tech giants of its own. No European Google or Amazon at scale. The AI Act was met with both praise. Hurrah for the first global AI rules, and criticism, like this will burden startups, Europe will fall behind. EU regulators respond that somebody has to set guardrails to prevent harmful AI uses, and they are willing to go first, as they did with privacy laws. It's a fascinating experiment in balancing innovation and regulation. Now, beyond these three big jurisdictions, it's worth noting most countries in the world are technology takers, not makers. Few nations have the resources to develop cutting edge AI from scratch, so a global disparity is emerging. According to the UN, the AI industry's benefits are highly concentrated in a few economies. Just 100 companies, mainly in the US and China, account for around 40% of global AI research and development spending. Think about that. A tiny fraction of companies and countries dominate the research, patents, and advancements. They also hold the most AI talent and computing power. Meanwhile, over 100 countries have no significant AI strategy or presence on the global stage. In fact, as of 2025, less than one third of developing countries even have a national AI policy or plan. This is creating an AI divide, similar to the digital divide, but potentially worse, because AI could amplify wealth gaps. How does this play out? Let's take developing economies. Many emerging countries benefited in the last few decades from globalization by doing labor intensive work. For example, Bangladesh grew its economy through garment manufacturing, lots of workers sewing clothes, and the Philippines and India have huge call center and business process outsourcing BPO industries, lots of English speaking graduates answering phones or doing back office tasks for Western companies. These are classic development pathways. Use abundant cheap labor to attract jobs from richer countries. But AI throws a wrench in that model. If rich countries automate those functions, robots sewing clothes, AI chatbots handling customer service, then the competitive advantage of poorer countries, cheap labor, diminishes. We are already seeing hints. Bangladesh's garment factories are starting to adopt AI assisted machines, which could displace a large portion of their 4 plus million garment workers in coming years. One estimate suggested as many as 60% of garment factory jobs in Bangladesh could be automated by 2030, which is staggering for an economy so reliant on that sector. In the Philippines, which has about 1.8 million call center BPO workers, officials and industry leaders are warning that AI could cut hundreds of thousands of those jobs soon. A Bloomberg industry estimate, cited by a Philippine labor official, said roughly 300,000 Filipinos might lose BPO jobs to AI in the next 5 years, even as AI creates some new higher skilled roles, resulting in a potential net loss of 200,000 jobs in that sector. For a country with millions of families depending on those call center jobs, that's a huge deal. It could mean higher unemployment and lost foreign revenue. So AI stands to strengthen the dominant players, the nations and companies that already have advanced tech, and undermine the traditional growth ladders for poorer economies. Wealthy countries can deploy AI in manufacturing, reducing the need to offshore factories for cheap labor. They can use AI in design, marketing, logistics, boosting productivity further. Meanwhile, lower income countries may struggle to compete or to find niches in an AI driven economy. Moreover, because AI development needs infrastructure like reliable electricity, widespread internet, and high education levels, countries lacking those face an uphill battle. Just to illustrate, internet access is only approximately 27% in low income countries versus approximately 90% in high income countries. Without connectivity, how do you join the AI revolution? The cost of broadband or electricity is another barrier that richer nations have solved or subsidized, but poorer ones still grapple with. All this could widen global inequality. The rich nations get richer and more advanced, while poorer nations are left further behind, importing AI tech from abroad rather than developing their own. We should also talk about big tech companies in this context, because they are like geopolitical actors in their own right. The AI race isn't just country versus country, it's also Google Microsoft versus China's Baidu Alibaba, DeepSeek versus OpenAI, etc. These firms have outsized influence. For instance, if a developing country wants access to advanced AI, they might be using Microsoft's Azure OpenAI service or Google's AI cloud, meaning they're depending on a foreign company's infrastructure. There's concern that a few giant corporations will corner the AI market, making it hard for local startups elsewhere to catch up. It's similar to how a few big Western firms dominated the internet: Google for search, Amazon for retail cloud, Facebook for social media. Now, potentially, a few will dominate AI foundation models and platforms. OpenAI, despite being a relatively new company, has such a head start in large language models that any smaller player in, say, South America or Africa trying to build a comparable AI faces a monumental challenge. They don't have the tens of billions of dollars or the supercomputing clusters or data needed, so they end up using OpenAI's models under license. This concentrates economic gains from AI in the hands of those few companies, and by extension, their home countries and investors. The UN's trade agency noted how just Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia each have market values around $3 trillion now. Each one of them individually is roughly the size of the entire GDP of the African continent. That comparison is mind-blowing and shows how digital tech giants have amassed wealth on a country-like scale. AI could increase their power further, which is why some call it digital colonialism or corporate imperialism if unchecked. Developing economies might essentially become AI consumers rather than creators, sending revenues to Silicon Valley or Shenzhen for the tools they use. The challenge going forward will be global cooperation. Can there be global standards or treaties on AI? It's tricky because, unlike nuclear arms, which only a few states controlled, AI is widespread and driven by the private sector too. The UN is talking about an AI governance body, and many leaders call for things like an Geneva Convention for AI or at least data sharing arrangements. But as of now, we are in a period of each bloc doing its own thing. The US and EU do share a lot of common ground. They regularly meet in a Trade and Technology Council to align on AI principles vis-a-vis China, for instance. And China, despite differences, is part of global discussions. Chinese tech companies even sit on international AI ethics panels. There's recognition that issues like AI safety, bias, and misuse are universal. For example, an unchecked AI arms race could be catastrophic for everyone, or a failure to coordinate could mean AI systems don't work well together on global problems like pandemics or climate modeling. Whether AI leads to a more unequal world or a more prosperous one, for all may depend on how wisely the global community manages this technology. International cooperation, inclusive policies, and thoughtful regulation will be key so that we don't end up in a scenario where, say, 2 or 3 superpowers and their corporate giants reap all the benefits and everyone else is left behind. The hope is that by setting ethical norms, as Europe tries, and investing in global access to AI through education and infrastructure in developing countries, we can harness AI for common good. Because if we fail, the divisions between rich and poor, between surveillance states and free societies, could deepen, and that would make the world a more unstable and less fair place. The story of AI geopolitics is still being written, and it's something we should all pay attention to, since it will shape the future of how we live and how the world is ordered in the decades to come. That's another thread pulled, but the fabric still tangled. If you found something worth thinking about, consider following the show and sharing it with someone who might too. You can listen to all episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Dheeraj Kumar, and I'll see you next time as we pull another thread from the fabric of our world.